Hello, today I'm showing you how to rationalize your SaaS applications by using the Flexera One SaaS Management module. First of all, coming to SaaS, and at the top we can see the Flexera One SaaS Management. We're going to start off with using the Home tab. This gives us a nice breakdown of the subscription, applications, and users, a quick glance, potential savings, how many subscription types we have, as well as alternative options of how many applications we are using, and further oversights of where we could potentially be saving money. As companies grow, add users, decrease, and remove users, SaaS applications can be something that get missed out on in regards of usage, as these aren't installed locally, but are accounts normally held by users added to the system directly. So by using a number of different connectors, which fills in the data as we can see here, for example, Microsoft, Salesforce, Jira, DocuSign, Cisco, we've got a nice oversight of our SaaS applications and how the data flows over the time. For example, in this case, we can see how our each module, for example, Salesforce, over time increases and decreases throughout the months, ups and downs over the time. And as you can see here, each one is color coded to give you an insight. For example, in January, Microsoft, we used just over 1 million, but then just after March, it had increased by another 200,000. So this gives us a nice insight to see that the data flow does change over time and increases and decreases over the period. For example, you can click on to view more, which will load the report. It will give you further details into the breakdown of how this data is calculated, as well as a nice little graph of potential savings where we're not monitoring, aka meaning we do not have usage, which there's a number of reasons why that might happen, and where we have active users. So in this case, we know for sure we have 749,000 active cost, and that means we have active metering from the applications in question. But then we know we have around 2 million where we might not be using the application and could potentially be saving further. For example, to see this, we can click on the view details, which filters this down to the potential savings, which lets us scroll down the list and go through the number of pages to see where we could be saving, breaking it down into monthly costs, where we're not monitored, monthly cost in USD in our case, and total cost overall when the subscription is active and ending in this case. Further to this, if you wish to look further into the insight, you can click on to, for example, our application here, which gives us a further breakdown of the costs over the months with a nice little line graph of where we could potentially be saving, the amount we've purchased, and how much we could potentially be saving. So in our graph here, we can see all our users that have the applications, their usage, when they were last active, and from there. So for example, we can go into the potential savings in this case here, where they have not used the application and there's no metering collected by the connectors or via the agent cloud metering. So clicking view users, as we can see here, it breaks it down into each user and why it's not been used in a sense in this case, because there's no activity for most of these users. Further to this, and you can see it breaks down again into where we have metering for the users. For example, if you had a user who was active before and has left the company since, but still has an account that's being on the connector system, for example, in this case, Adobe, we can see that this user hasn't used the application in 1 month. And the question is, do you still need this user added to the system paying for a license for it? If not, you could look to remove this and have a potential saving. And this can be further reviewed over time if you want to see into individual users. For example, if we go into this user, we can see that we have a number of applications assigned to this user over time, and we can see that a lot of their applications are not got metering or not used or have been used a while ago now. So this gives you a nice little insight in how you can break it down to per user, down to per application, per subscription, and per connector. As we can see here, we can get a nice insight into how the data is collected. For example, here we can see this is collected by the SaaS connector. We can see it's collected by device details through the connectors, agents. We can see via SSO, single sign-on options, and further from there. So the question is a quicker review of how each one of these is actually collected and how they mean can vary. So using the documentation, as we can see here, it can breaks it down into each icon, when and how it's been collected, and just a short description of what it's possible to collect. As certain actions, for example, SaaS connectors, can collect a number of different aspects, but this can vary depending on applications and connectors used. So it's key to, first of all, review the documentation as well as look at the further connector actual data retrieval, what's actually collected by the each connector, as it does vary, and it is key to be aware that certain ones might not collect activity, and you do not want to be removing users if there's no activity solely on that factor, as they might still use the application, but it's not possible for us to collect it. So, as we can see here, it breaks it down into further details, and we can go into each one further by clicking onto the SaaS connector details, which brings us to a further insight in the documentation. Back onto the Flexera One platform, if we go back to SaaS and go into applications, this gives us a further insight into each connector, and we can see from here each individual application that comes from that connector. As in our case, it's the whole platform, and it gives us a nice little insight into our total users for each application. For example, OnePass, we have 73 users, 0 subscriptions, and 0 active users. So we can see this is collected by browser verified, which means it came from the browser agent, agent-based browsing metering, and that's how we get the system into it. So further to this, if you want to see which users have this, you can click onto that application. You get welcomed with an initial welcoming screen with a short insight of what the application is, further details such as governance, a risk score if it's for security, and other key information. But the main factor we care about in this case is the users. As we can see here, we have the 73 users, and in this case, we have no activity for these users, which breaks it down into the actual usage, which might play a big part into increasing and decreasing the application usage and user count that you have for this application if nobody's using it, but still paying for this subscription. Coming back to the main SaaS menu, clicking into subscriptions, this gives us a further insight into what the home screen gives into each individual subscription that comes in via the connector. Active, inactive, no activity, and not monitored. So, as I said before, these gives a nice little breakdown, just with a bit more detail on this screen than the other one does, such as percentages on the utilization, and other such key information such as unassigned, where you're overpaying or over purchasing potential subscriptions where you might not need them. As you can see here, purchased 291, only 191 are actually assigned, and 100 are not used, meaning you have an over excess of 100, which might not be needed, and you could have potential savings. So, coming to unmanaged assets, as we can see here, this gives us a nice overview of all of our assets So this page shows us a list of unmanaged subscription and application users can use to be navigated to discover the application subscriptions sourced from various discovered connectors such as CASB, Entra ID, Okta, and Cupra. So this gives us a nice overview in that sort of aspect. In this case, we can see from here, our data is coming from the Entra ID demo connector we have set up in this case, and gives us an insight into when they were discovered and different details. And further to this, you can come to the subscription page, which will also give the other key information as the overhaul of all your subscriptions. To note, these unmanaged ones are displayed here because these are the data that comes from connectors such as CASB, Entra ID, and Okta that could not be automatically added to the Snow system by default. So we have put these as an unmanaged asset because of key details we can get. So further from there, the key part is the reliant of the data coming in. It all comes from how you have set up your connectors. By coming to administration, SaaS connectors, this gives you an insight of all of your connectors that you have set up. For example, here we have a number of connectors here, as well as their current status, when they've been scheduled last, and when they last imported. And this is key because if the connector's not set up, you'll be relying on the cloud-based metering if that's set up in your agents, and that won't be able to collect as much detail as we can via the connectors. So setting up each connector, for example, Microsoft 365, will give you the best insight and overview of your SaaS applications to let you be able to make the correct judgments for increasing, decreasing the subscriptions where possible to potentially save you where needed. I thank you for watching, and I hope this helps you understand how to rationalize your SaaS application data using Flexera One SaaS Management. Thank you.